Okay, ma'am, should we start?
Yeah.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second session of Brain Awareness Week. Brain Awareness Week is organized by Dana Foundation alongside organizations like International Brain Research Organization and Federation of European Neuroscience Societies. This week is organized with support of Gujarat Forensic Sciences University and our team. I'm Anjali Salot, member of organizing team for this event. I'm um, organizing team for this event. I am studying masters in neuropsychology and the moderator for this session. For this session with us today is Goldy Yadav. She's a Fulbright Nehru doctoral fellow at National Institute of Health and is pursuing PhD in cognitive science at IIT Gandhinagar. She has a keen interest in understanding how the human brain works and is actively involved in neuroscientific research. Her work explores how humans learn, retain skilled actions and the brain processes that facilitate such learned behavior. So the topic for ma'am's presentation today is effect of exercise on the brain. Ma'am,
Yeah, yeah.
you can begin. You can start.
Oh, thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Brain Awareness Week. And I really hope that you guys are doing well during this pandemic, and I hope your family is safe. So let's start this. So I'm going to talk about exercises and how they play a very important role in facilitating brain functions and how it can be a very good tool to enhance your brain health and its functions. So for a very long time, exercises were actually thought to be important for body, for the health of the body. So people would do exercise to lose weight or to be physically fit. But then lately, we started realizing that the effects of exercise is not just limited to the body and its functions, but it has a significant impact on brain and its health and the functions that the brain does. Uh, so if you actually search on Google Scholar or PubMed with the word brain, you'll find a number of research papers. But if you do exercise and brain search on the web page, you'll find 1% of the total brain research is actually related to finding the effect of exercises on brain. So researchers have realized that exercise has the effects of exercise are not just limited to the body, but they expand to brain as well. And this has gotten neuroscientists very, very interested in this because exercise, first of all, is a very easy tool to use in therapeutic settings. It's non-invasive, so you don't need to apply something to your body or to inject with something to see the effects of exercise, and it is very easy to administer. So given these three characteristics that exercise has, it is very important to study the role that it plays in enhancing brain functions. And if we find sufficient evidence for that, we can actually use this for our patient population. Now, why we say that exercise can enhance brain health? So there have been some evidence from animal research actually, which shows that one particular form of animal, which is known as sea squirt, which is very mobile. So it swims in the water when it is adult, but as soon as it actually stops moving in the water, it attaches itself to a rock. And since the life form moves from a movement form to a sedentary form, it doesn't need to move in the water anymore. So what it does as a consequence of that is eat its own brain. The first thing that it does is eat its own brain. So it suggests that when you are not moving, you do not even need your brain. So therefore, movement which we do in form of exercises is actually very, very crucial for brain. uh, some neuroscientists actually take the position to say that the only reason that humans have the brain is to actually make movements. And therefore, I think by the end of this presentation, you'll realize why we are saying that exercises are very important for brain. Now, the other issue with brain, I think you might have heard this in your bio lectures, that unlike other cells and tissues of the body, where they are constantly regenerated and replenished, in the brain, if you lose neurons, it's very, very difficult to get those dead neurons back. So once neurons are dead, they're dead for life. So therefore, in brain research and in a lot of neurodegenerative disorders, the goal for scientists and researchers is to actually delay that neuronal death, or try to intervene to uh, to actually mitigate the effects of those neuronal death. So people have found that exercise, along with some other factors, can play a very important role in actually modulating neuroregeneration. So it doesn't mean that it will give you the neurons that are dead back, but it can delay the onset of all of that. Now, the effects of exercise on brain have actually, the effects that you can see are at different levels. So the first, and I'll take you through all of this. The first is functional effect. So here we'll tell you that how doing exercise for 20 minutes, 30 minutes can enhance some of the cognitive functions. Now, cognitive function here means what the brain does. So enhancing memory, for instance, enhancing attention span, and working memory and all of that. And the evidence for this, the effects of exercise on functions of the brain, comes from both human and animal models. So it is shown in both humans as well as animals. The second level that we are talking about is the structural level. So here, by doing extensive exercises, you can see changes in the brain tissue itself. Which is a very remarkable thing, because for a very long time we did not think this could happen. But newer uh, neuroimaging techniques have actually provided enough evidence to show that the effects of exercise can actually be seen at tissue level. And again, this is in both human and animals. Now we go deeper and we see the effects of exercise even at molecular and physiological level. So you see certain molecules in the brain that are good for brain health are enhanced following exercise, and that actually leads to the effects that you see at function level. So I'll try to show you how all of these are actually interconnected to each other. It's not that you see one but not the other. It's actually they're all interconnected. But here we are just talking at the effects at operating at different levels. So starting from the very basics, very low level cellular functions, to then structural and then functional. And then combined effect at these three levels give rise to what we call neuroprotective effects. So this means that a lot of diseases will you can delay the onset of a lot of neurological disease. You can actually diminish the effects of those diseases, and so on and so forth. So I'll give you some examples later in the presentation. Let me see if there are questions. Uh, okay, I think my sound is a problem. So let me be a little louder. So as I said, that the effects can be seen at all different levels. And let me take you through one of these step by step. So when I said that the effects can be seen at functional level, this means that doing exercises can enhance the function of the brain. And you know that brain does a lot of stuff. In fact, everything that we do is coming from our brain. So there have been multiple studies that have shown that by doing exercise, children actually can enhance their cognitive performance. And these were the tests where kids were tested on perceptual skills, intelligence quotient, achievement, and verbal tests, and some memory related tests. So the way these studies work is that kids are made to do these tests, and then they perform exercise for 20 to 30 minutes, and then they're tested again. And then there'll be one group which is not doing the exercise. And the way you want to see the effect is that you compare the group which is receiving exercise or doing exercise with the group that did not. And then you can see that the group which did the exercise had better performance after that as compared to the group that did not do the exercise. Now, we also have the evidence for the effects from older individuals and adults. So this effect is not only limited to children, but we can also see this in adults. And doing these exercises have shown to improve their executive function and learning and memory and all those cognitive skills. Uh, in addition to human research, we also see effects coming from animal models. So a lot of these studies were done on rats, and people found that if you make rats do a mouse or rat do one of these exercises, so the way you make rats or mouse do these exercises by you put a maze in their cage and they run on it. So and researchers compare, and with animals the advantage is that you can look at their brain, you can slice the brain and look at the structural and the molecular and cellular level, and people have found that doing these exercises actually can affect a lot of brain areas, particularly hippocampus, which is involved in a lot of tasks that we do. Now, when we talk about structural level, we see in humans as well as animals increase in brain volume. So there have been a number of researchers that have shown that after exercising for a long period of time, the brain volume changes, it actually increases. There is a significant increase in gray matter. And then using EEG, people have found that there is this increased alpha and beta band, which is, and these bands are actually important for a lot of cognitive tasks that we do. Similarly, we know that when we exercise, the blood flow increases, and we know that for brain, blood is very important because that is what is delivering all the important nutrients to the neurons. So post exercise, there is increase in cerebral blood volume. There is angiogenesis, which is you have um, more vasculature in the brain, and that again helps in delivering a lot of blood to the neurons, and which supports their function ultimately. There is cell proliferation, but this is limited to certain parts of the brain. Now, let me show you what areas are we talking about. So here, names are not important for you, but what I want to take you away from this slide is there are different parts of the brain that have, using fMRI, we have found the evidence that there is increase in the volume in these areas post exercise. And you can see that it's spread all over the brain actually. So it's, the effect is not limited to a particular region, but you can see multiple regions are actually benefited by exercise. Now let me show you another picture here. Now this is this is a EEG study that was done where participants were told to either sit for 20 minutes or then walk for 20 minutes. You can see on your left that after sitting for 20 minutes, there is a dip in neural activity. So what you see here is a topo plot. The darker colors, the blue and the green, suggest that there is less neural activity. Whereas after walking for 20 minutes, what you see on the right, this red area is actually showing enhanced neural activity. Now, this enhanced neural activity is important because this is what supports a lot of cognitive functions, such as attention and modulating your a lot of your executive functions. So you don't need to do heavy exercises. This is what it shows, that even walking for 20 minutes is very, very beneficial to brain. It leads to enhanced activity of a number of neurons in the brain, which then supports a lot of cognitive functions. Now, this is an evidence from animal models. So with humans, the challenge is that you can't dig deeper into the brain to look at what are the changes that are happening at the neuronal level. But we have the liberty to do this in animals. Now, what is shown here in these four different actually plots. So the A that you see on top is actually a setup for mice, these mice, and this is a control condition. So they are just put in this chamber. Now in the E, it's an enriched environment. So what it means is that in these chambers, these mice have toys to play with. In C, what you see is again mice chamber, and they are allowed to run. So they have those mazes where they can run. And in D, you see their chambers with toys and mazes to run. So basically, the interest here was to see what happens if you change the environment in which these mice are caged. Now, what you see in E, F, G, and H is actually so this is a particular imaging that was done to see what happens at the structural level in the brain, and you can actually grossly see. You don't need to be an expert to really interpret this plot, but you can see the plots G and H are very different from E and F. So you see a lot of redness in G and H, which is actually related to a lot of neuronal proliferation, cell proliferation. Now G and H are coming from mice which were put in these cages where they were allowed to run and they were allowed to play with toys and all. So what this shows actually is that if these mice are provided an environment where they can run and where they are playing with toys, it supports brain function by actually increasing the number of neurons in their brain, and which is significantly different from these mice in these other groups who are not receiving that treatment. Something like this cannot be done in humans, of course, because we need to examine the brain at cellular level. So for this, you need the brain tissue, but we can only see this in animal models. Uh, Now, I have told you that exercises are important, and I know that during the time that we are in currently, since we can't go out, it's difficult for us to indulge in a lot of strenuous activities. Now, the question is, are there simpler exercises that you can use just perhaps by sitting at home, which can still help support your brain function and perhaps enhances? So the answer to that is yes. Uh, Even simple, very simple technique of deep breathing can actually help your brain. So we conducted this study in 2015 in our lab, and the idea here was to see whether simpler exercises can have any effect on complex brain function. And the idea for this study actually came from one of the internships that I did at NIMHANS, where I observed that patients with psychiatric illnesses were actually advised by the doctors to do meditation and yoga along with the medications that they were taking. And I was very intrigued by that. When I was talking to the doctors, they suggested that for the patients, medications are helpful to a certain extent, but by doing these things such as meditation and yoga, they see a lot of benefit in these patient population. So that really got me fascinated by all of this, and I was wondering if we can see the effect of something like this. We can test this in our lab and see if something so simple as just deep breathing can have any effect on cognitive functions. So to do this, we wanted to study the effects of deep breathing on retention of memory. So this was one question that I was interested in, retention of skill memory. So we just wanted to study how breathing can modulate how well you retain. And when you read literature, you'll realize that we are not the first one, of course, to explore the role of deep breathing exercise. A lot of people have already done that in the past. We know in India, and of course, all over the world, meditation has become very popular, and not just for lay person, but also for scientists and researchers, particularly neuroscientists, because there have been enough evidence now to show that meditation really has significant impact on brain and its function. So a lot of people have done this, and they have shown effects of these practices on different functions. However, as I mean, when I was doing this study at that time, it was not clear whether such simpler techniques can affect complex processes such as memory and memory retention. So we were interested in understanding what happens if you do deep breathing. Does that really modulate the amount of memory retention? So to do this, we got participants in our lab, and I think with the presentation, the animations are not working, so you see everything at one time on the screen. But let me take you through this. So it's important to understand what these groups are to understand the data later on. Now, this experiment was done over 2 days. Now, we had 3 sets of participants. Group one that you see here, we call it control group, and they come to the lab, they do a task. I'll show you the task in a bit. They do a motor task, a motor learning task, and we call this learning session here. Then they rest for 30 minutes, and that is what is shown here, and we call it no intervention. After that 30 minutes of rest, they are tested on the task that they learned in the learning session, and then they go back home. We bring them back to the lab on the second day and we test them on the same task that they did on day one. So we call it a retention test too. Now, the second group that you see here, which we call breathing immediate, is doing the task in the learning session, just like group one. Now, immediately after the task, they do deep breathing for 30 minutes. Now, in this deep breathing, they are doing just deep inhalation and exhalation with one nostril at a time. So they inhale through one nostril, hold it, and then exhale through the other nostril. I think it's called it's Anulom Vilom Pranayam, and it's called alternate nostril breathing exercise. So that is what they do for 30 minutes. Then they are sent back, they are tested on the task again. Briefly, and then they are sent back home. They come back the next day and then they are tested in the task again. And the third group is is actually a mixture of group one and two. So what they do is that they do the task in the learning session, then they rest for 30 minutes like group one. They are tested on the task again, and after the retention test they do the exercise for 30 minutes, then they are sent back home, and they actually come back to the lab next day and they're tested on the task again. Now, here the idea for having group 2 and group 3 in such a manner was to see the effects of exercise, whether the effects are limited to short term or the effects can be long term as well. Now, let me show you the task, what they were actually doing. So, yeah, you can't see the animation. So let me take you through this. So on the screen, so participants are actually sitting in our lab. They sit in front of a computer. They see something on the computer and they are told that they are given a tablet on which they have to draw. And it's a motor skill task. So they have to actually make skilled actions. Now on the computer screen, they see these black concentric rings that you see on your screen. Only that comes first with the blue rectangle on top. The blue rectangle is where they have to enter first using that stylus on the tablet. So they enter into this blue rectangle and then they're given one audio cue. They start moving. Now, what you see in gray here is a trajectory that one of our participants drew. Okay, so this is what they draw in the beginning of the session. What they are told actually is that they have to remain within these concentric rings and finish the movement. So they have to start from the blue rectangle, they have to stay within the two concentric rings, and they have to come back to the blue rectangle, and they have to do this within 2.1 seconds. You can clearly see here that participants are going outside the ring. And this suggests that in the beginning of the session, participants were not able to make fast and accurate movements. So they were not able to finish the movement within 2.1 seconds by staying inside the concentric rings. Now on the screen, you also see this red circle. The red circle actually denotes their hand position at 2.1 seconds. So we are just giving them this visual input so that they understand that at 2.1 second, their hand should be in the blue rectangle. Whereas what you see on the screen shows that at 2.1 seconds, they were not even closer to the blue rectangle. So they are actually told, they're encouraged to move faster and make accurate movements with time. And we tell them that if you do that, your errors, what you see here is error on the screen, which is calculated based on how what part of the trajectory that they drew was outside the rings, and whether they were able to finish the movement in 2.1 seconds or not. So I just hope that the task is clear to you. It's very difficult to explain it without the animations not working, because you see everything at one go on the screen, which is not a very good thing. So just, I think maybe I should repeat it. So what happens is that once participants are sitting in front of the computer, the first thing that they see on the screen are these two black concentric rings with the blue rectangle, and they are told to enter the blue rectangle using the stylus on a tablet. Once they enter, they hear a tone. They are told to move within the blue, within the two rings, and reach back to the blue rectangle, and they are told to do this fast. So they have to finish this in 2.1 seconds. Now, the gray here is a representative trajectory that one of our participants drew. You can see that they went outside the ring, which contributes to the error, which is 40 in this case. And also the fact that they were not able to finish the movement in 2.1 seconds because the red disk is not near the blue rectangle. So if they had done that, the error would drop. This happens in the beginning, but you can see on the next slide that by the end of the session, participants actually learn to make accurate movements. So in this case, what you see that whatever trajectory was drawn was well within the two concentric rings, and the red disk is actually on top of the blue rectangle, which suggests that participants not only made accurate movements, but they were also fast in the sense that they finished the movement in 2.1 seconds. So this just tells you that participants can learn a complex task, and this also shows that how plastic our brain is. I mean, participants do 100 of these trials, and by the end of the 100 trial, they actually learn these tasks. So it's very, you can quickly learn complex tasks, which just shows how plastic your brain is. So now this is the task that they do. So they do the task, then depending on which group they are in, they either rest or do the exercise. They are tested in the task again, and then they are sent back home, and then they test it again. So let's see the results. Yeah. So here, no. So here, what you see is the learning session data. In this, you can see all three groups, which are shown in three different colors. So the blue is our control group, which is never doing the breathing exercise. Then we have the red and the green, which is one of the group is doing the breathing after the learning session, whereas the other group is doing breathing after their retention test one. Uh, Here you can clearly see that all three groups are able to learn the task in a very similar manner. So in the beginning, they make a lot of error. What you see on the y-axis is error, the magnitude of error on the task that they did. And then on the x-axis, you have bin number, and each bin has 10 different trials. So overall, participants did 100 trials. Uh, so you can clearly see that all three groups learn the task. So they start off with high error, but by the end of the session, their errors drop, which suggests that they were able to make these fast and accurate movements. And all three performed in a similar way. Now, funnily, what you cannot see on this screen is the retention data, and that's because of the animation. So let me see if I have, just give me a second. Let me see. Oh, can you see my screen? Okay, wait. Maybe I should pull this. It's weird because you can't see the retention data.
Hi Goldy, can you hear me?
Hi. Yeah, can you see my screen now?
I can, but if you want, you could open it on any other browser if you want, or any other tool which you're using, and just
Okay.
share your screen. That is also
Yeah.
possible.
Okay, so I
Just
just
share
did
your
that.
screen.
Yeah, I am
Yeah,
sharing. I have opened my PowerPoint presentation. Can you see that?
yes, I'll enhance that. Yep.
Yeah. So can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, so in the on the webinar, it was not showing you the retention data. So can you now see it? Retention at 30 minutes and retention at 24 hours?
Yes.
Okay. So as I told you that all three groups were able to learn the task, and you can see in the learning session, everybody's doing the same, which tells you that participants in all three groups learned the task in a similar manner. Now, what is interesting is what happens when you test them after those 30 minutes. Now you can see that one of our groups, which is shown in red here, is sitting at a very low error when they are tested at 30 minutes, whereas the other two groups are actually still making some errors on the task. Now, if you remember from the design, that this red group that you see here was the group which did breathing exercise after they had learned the task. So which tells you that if participants who did breathing exercise were able to retain better as compared to those who did not do the exercise after learning the task. Now, when we test them at 24 hours, which is after a day, since they have learned the task, now what you see is the the green group, which was sitting at a high error when they were tested at 30 minutes, is also back to where the red group is, showing that since they did breathing after their retention test one, that breathing helped them retain better. So their performance is now as good as the group that did breathing after the learning session. Whereas our control group, which never did the breathing exercise, they only rested for 30 minutes after learning the session, have are still showing some impairment in retention. So the way you actually interpret these graphs is that if you have learned the task in the learning session, and if by the end of the session your errors are close to zero, next time when you are tested, the idea is that your error should be where you ended during the training session, which suggests 100% retention. But if you are not where you were at the end of the learning session, that suggests forgetting on the task. And that is what you see in these plots, that some of our groups are actually forgetting, whereas one of our groups is actually retaining the task very well. And the group that retains the task very well is the group that did the breathing exercise. So this suggests that doing these simpler exercises, which is just sitting and doing these deep breathing practices, can actually enhance retention of a very, very complex motor skill task. And the effects are not only seen at 30 minutes, which is immediately after performing the breathing exercise, but they can also be seen at 24 hours. So not only short-term effect, but also long-term effect at 24 hours. We were also actually interested in testing these participants after a week, but it was very difficult to bring all of them back to the lab. But I think that'll be a future study where you would like to test the effect of such practices for after a very long period of, say, a week or a month, to understand whether changes that happen during those practices are actually long term, or are they limited to a short term period. So these are the findings, and based on these findings, we say that practicing these simpler exercises can actually help retain uh, a newly learned skill better as compared to those who do not perform these exercises. And with these results, we can actually provide evidence for the fact that even doing simpler techniques like just sitting and breathing can have an effect on a complex cognitive function. And in this case, it's motor memory. So this was very interesting for us, although we were not able to actually study the mechanism through which these enhancements are happening in our task. But of course, that is something that we want to do in future, is that we want to understand why do we see the effects that we see with the group that is doing the breathing exercise. But I just want to tell you that it is important to show effects of such simpler exercises, because for the impact that they can have on rehabilitation. So we know that patients who have neurological damage have difficulty making a lot of movement. So the lifestyle is not as active as it is for healthy people. For them, it is very, very challenging to do complex exercises, aerobic exercises, running on a treadmill, going to gym. And therefore, if we can show that even simpler exercises can help, it will be a very it will have a very big impact for our patient population, because to them it's easy for them to sit and do these simpler exercises than to be doing running and going on a treadmill. But of course, this is a very this is just a small finding in that direction. We need to extensively do research to understand what is exactly happening when you are doing these exercises, simple exercises, and what are the changes that are happening in the brain that are causing the enhancement that we are seeing on these tasks. But apart from these simpler breathing exercises, we actually do understand what aerobic exercises are doing to our brain. So this is actually an overview of perhaps what I have already said in this presentation, is that physical activity can have multiple effects on body and the brain. Now, in the brain particularly, you can see the effects at cellular level and then at structural and functional level. Uh, Everything that is written, by the way, on this slide is has evidence to back it up. Okay, so there are studies that support everything that is written on this slide. So the effect of exercise, for instance, at cellular, molecular, and circuit level has been shown in animal models. The effect at the effect on different biomarkers have been shown in human model, and then peripheral biomarkers in both human and animal models. So you can clearly see that the exercise is not only having a gross larger level effect, but it is starting from a very specific cellular level effect, then leading to structural and functional effect. And through these changes, it is then actually impacting behavior, which you can see by testing participants on different cognitive tasks. And then newer data suggests that it has very, very important role to play in preventing and delaying the onset of a number of neurodegenerative diseases. And this is where we want to go as the community of neuroscientist researchers, is that we want to understand how we can use this knowledge to help our patient population. Because I think you may know this very well, that for neurodegenerative diseases, we do not have a promising cure as of now. So the idea is that you would like to delay it as much as you can, and you would like to actually explore preventive options that can be employed, so that you can prevent onset of these diseases, because cure we have not been able to find. So this is where a lot of researchers are interested in and are extensively working to understand how physical activity, given the fact that it is cheap, easy to administer, non-invasive, people want to study this. Because of course there are other techniques such as brain stimulation and all of that, which you can use, and they have also shown some effect at behavioral level and in disease cases. But the fact that they are very expensive, they can have certain side effects. People really want to explore other avenues that are easier, and one of the promising candidate in that is doing exercises, be it physical or just sitting and doing these breathing exercises or meditation. These are simpler exercises, simpler interventions that can affect brain function, brain health, and the only question is we want to understand how it is happening. So that is what the next slide is, that how exactly is it happening. And there are a number of open questions in this. So what you see on this screen, you can actually see a lot of these weird names here. These are different molecules. You don't have to remember this. But what this suggests is that exercise affects the effects of exercise are definitely at cellular level, but we don't understand how that translates to what we see at functional level. So how exercises are affecting your function, such as enhancing memory, enhancing your attention, improving your working memory capacity, that jump is actually not clear. So the question marks that you see on the slide is actually still open areas that people are exploring, that how the effects that are coming from exercise at these different levels are then translating to give rise to neuroplasticity, and then to affect our brain function, different cognitive functions. So this is still a very active area of research. And those of you who are interested in further pursuing this, I really encourage you to read some of the literature based on this. And we need people who can actually venture into this and explore some of these questions. And if, just to summarize, uh, I think you all know that exercises help. I mean, there's no doubt in that. But of course, science is just providing evidence and just telling general public how we are seeing the effects that we see from exercises. Now, on this slide, what you can see is, so you see a number of arrows, and then you have these other connections with the dead end. So that shows that, so for example, if you start from the center where the exercise block is in purple, you can see that exercise reduces inflammation, the red on the top. Exercise reduces age related cognitive decline and other neurodegenerative diseases. Exercise reduces metabolic syndrome and other hypertension and insulin related problems. And at the same time, it enhances these growth factor molecules in the body and enhances the signaling cascade, which in turn affects brain health. So brain health is improved, cognitive functions are improved, brain plasticity is improved, neurogenesis in animal models have been shown to be affected by that, and then vascular functions improve. So the effects are actually at multiple level with just a simple intervention. So doing exercises is keeping a check on a lot of these so to say bad uh, factors that can affect aging and death and all of that. And at the same time, it is enhancing these growth factors and proteins that are important for neuroregeneration. And that's what you want, because we know from life sciences work that inflammation is really bad for your body. Metabolic syndrome is bad for your body. Insulin resistance is bad for your body, and cognitive decline is bad for your body. So if there is something that can keep a check on all of that, it's very interesting to explore that further. And at the same time, it is increasing the amount of good proteins in your brain and leading to changes at structural and functional levels. So this is where I would like to end, and thank you so much. I know that being stuck at home, it is difficult to actively engage in exercises, but I really encourage you to do. And let me also tell you that a lot of scientists are right now worried that after this pandemic, we'll actually enter into a mental health crisis. Uh, by the fact that we have been isolated for such a long time and we are living in a world that we never thought we would be dealing with. So it's very important to take care of your brain health, and I think that's one of the goals for this brain awareness week, is that we are somehow able to tell
Okay.
public in general that
Um,
how
Am
important
I
it
audible?
is to
Okay, so
actually
the
take care
first
of your
question
brain health.
is
Because
Is
when
there
we are
any
ill and when
exercise
we are
for
sick,
migraine?
when there's some bodily injury, we attend to it, but mental health is often ignored in our society, and it is very very important that you pay attention to that. So with that, I would like to end, and I'm open to take questions. Yeah, yeah. Oh, so yeah, I think I read that when I was trying to set up my presentation. So migraine itself is still under extensive research. Uh, it's not even known what causes migraine and all of that. But what people suggest is that so migraine is actually related to your lifestyle. Actually, so if you sleep on time, for instance, it has been shown to improve some of the effects. So people see less episodes of migraine if they sleep on time, get up on time, and
So, a
light
better
exercises
lifestyle.
help. In fact, there are some papers which say that you
Yeah.
should not do
So, the second
extensive
question
exercise
is
because that can
do
have
you,
some
sorry,
deleterious effects. So in fact,
so
doing
does
some light,
exercise
moderate
affect
exercises help. But I think the key
glial cells?
finding was sleeping on time and getting up on time is one thing that science says can help reduce the episodes of migraine. Yeah, that is what it is. Yeah, yeah, it's all related to that. Oh, so that is an interesting question. So actually, people have started looking at glial cells in addition to neurons, because the newer evidence suggests that they play very very important role in facilitating what neurons do. But
Okay,
the
so any
direct
effects on
evidence of exercise
synapses?
on glial cells is not known. So that is what I can tell you. The problem with that is that in humans, you can't do that kind of research because you need to have access to the brain and all of that. Uh, but yeah, so far no evidence from animal model or human model. Yeah. But whosoever asked it, I would encourage them to do that research in future. We would like to know that.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
so
next,
in yes, so in the animal model,
all
we
right.
know that
So the
synaptic
next question
connections are
is,
strengthened. You
does
have actually
neuroelectrical
a lot of
activity after
synapses that are
walking
formed. So in one of
only
the
affect
figures that I
activity in
showed,
parietal and
the
somatosensory
reds
regions?
were
Does
cell
it not affect
proliferation,
higher
and
level
from the
regions
same
like
paper, I
frontal
think
lobe
I did not
areas?
put that figure, but you can see synapses increasing after mice is subjected to these running exercises. Yes, but only from animal models. So yeah, so it does affect, but the finding that I showed you was specific to a task, and therefore the EEG topoplot that you actually saw was over the parietal areas. But yes, there is evidence that it affects frontal areas as well. So the slide before that, mm, let me go back. Yeah, so this slide actually shows other areas which are frontal as well. So in this, you see these frontal areas, which is PFC, prefrontal cortex. You also see parietal areas. You see parietal area. You also see deep areas such as cingulate cortex. So, so that's what I was saying. That the take home
Okay.
from this slide was that
So the
number of
next question
brain
is,
regions are affected by it.
how do you decide the
So it's not,
intervention
yeah,
period
it's not
length?
specific
What
to
if
one region, but it's
breathing
a number of
before
regions
both the
being
retention
affected by
test?
exercise. So I think the way to think about it is that what exercise is doing is that it is enhancing, first of all, blood flow to your brain. And since blood flow is affected to the entire brain, it can affect different areas at the same time. Okay, yeah, that's a very good question. So that was based on some of the literature from aerobic exercises. So in that, people usually make participants do it for 30 minutes. So just to be, so just to be aligned with that, we chose to do it for 30 minutes. We were debating about doing it for 15 or 20 minutes because we thought we can try it for shorter duration, but just to be aligned with what previous research has shown with aerobic exercises, we chose to do it for 30 minutes. We could have enhanced it, but the problem is that participants were not willing to sit for such a long time and do these exercises. And these were all
Ma'am, some
naive
more questions
participants.
are
So
there
these are
regarding the
participants who
research.
have no
So,
prior
what was the mean age of
experience
the
with
sample?
meditation or such practices. So it's very difficult for them to just sit and do breathing exercises for 30 minutes. Even for us, it's very challenging just to sit for 30 minutes and not do anything and focus on our breath. So that was the challenge. So we decided to stick with 30 minutes because people in aerobic exercises work, they do it for 30 minutes usually. Mm.
And how
Okay.
were the participants able to perform a 30-minute pranayam? Pranayam.
Yeah. So the mean age was 18. So the age range, I can tell you, I'm not able to remember the mean age, but the age range was 18 to 28 years of participants, and these were all healthy college students.
Okay.
Uh, and yes, that's a very good question. That how were they able to do it for 30 minutes? So there were some participants who were not able to do it, but then most of them, I had told them that this is what the study is, and it would be really nice if they can do it. And they were able to do it for 30 minutes, so that was good. Even I knew that that would be a challenge because if you have no prior experience with any of these techniques, it's very, very challenging to do these for 30 minutes. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. One more question. Can depression be cured by doing exercise?
So it's I can't say for, I mean, definitely that it can be cured, but yes, a number of findings have said that patients with depression, the symptoms actually uh, are the symptoms decrease if they do exercises. So it's very well known in the depression literature that doing exercises, being physically active, helps a lot. In fact, people say that just walking helps such patients. with long-term depression, even PTSD. So for depression and PTSD, the evidence comes from both aerobic exercise literature and also yoga and meditation. So all of these have been collectively shown to help people who are suffering from depression, long-term depression, as well as PTSD. Yeah.
Okay. So, ma'am, what are the effects of exercise on addiction? Both seem to feed partly with dopamine reward circuit.
Yeah, so I'm not really very well familiar with that literature. Uh, yeah, but what I know is that uh, it was done with ADHD individual, but I'm not sure about the addictive. But there has been some research with ADHD population where they have shown that doing exercise for a long duration actually. So in my case, we just show the evidence with one single session of exercise. But with ADHD and patient population, you need to do it over multiple sessions. So with ADHD, I know that there are some papers which have shown that doing a long-term exercise engaged in activities like these help such patients. Yeah. And in some cases, the effects are comparable to what medications do. So that was very interesting that the effects were comparable to medications.
Okay, ma'am, last two questions. So, could you kindly repeat about the retention analysis graph, if
Oh,
possible?
yeah, yeah, yeah. You can see my slide, right?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
okay, it's visible.
Yeah. So here, the first is the learning session where they do 100 trials of the task. You can see that in the beginning they are making a lot of error, but by the end of the session, the errors drop to very close to zero, which suggests that participants were able to make a fast and accurate movement and they were able to learn the task. Now, the idea is that when I test you subsequently on this task, I expect that your performance will be where you ended in the learning session, right? Because you have already learned the task. So I would expect that you will be showing me a better performance when I'll test you subsequently on the same task. Now, what happens is that when we test participants at 30 minutes, only one group is showing 100% retention. So their performance is comparable to where they ended in the learning session, whereas the other two groups have impaired retention. So look, they were here by the end of the training session, and now their performance has worsened. So they are making errors now. So this suggests that there was a difference between the breathing immediate group and these two other groups. Now, by doing exercise after this retention test one, we were able to see that one of the group's performance was back to where they were at the end of the learning session. So this green that you see performed exercise here. So if you remember from the design, one of the groups is performing the exercise after their retention test, which is this green one in the plot. So they perform exercise here, and their performance is now back to where they were at the end of the learning session, which shows retention now. So they forgot here when they were tested after 30 minutes, but their performance was as good as day one end of learning session when they were tested at 24 hours. Whereas our control group is still not performing as good as where they ended on day one. So they are still forgetting to a certain extent. Whereas the groups that did breathing are retaining almost 100% of whatever they learned.
So, ma'am, for how long do they remember this activity? I mean,
Oh,
retention length, how long
so
is it?
yeah, so we test retention twice. So one was at 30 minutes. So they do the learning. I mean, they do the task, then they do the intervention for 30 minutes, right? One group is resting for 30 minutes,
Yes,
whereas
ma'am.
the other group is doing the exercise for 30 minutes. And we immediately after that we test them. So we call this retention at 30 minutes. And then the second test is after 24 hours from the learning session. And so these are the only tests that we do. So we test them at 30 minutes after learning the task, and then after 24 hours. So the effects are evident at 30 minutes and at 24 hours. And I was saying when I was presenting this that we also wanted to do at 7 days, which is a week later, but we were not able to get back participants after a long period. But the idea actually is to test after a week or a month to see how long the effects last. So they
So,
just do. the exercise once, but we want to see how long the effects are lasting.
So the results would have been better if it was a longitudinal study.
Yeah. But it's very difficult to get same participants
Yeah.
back to the lab. It's just challenging. Yeah.
Yeah. So, last question. What is the changes in molecular and cellular level in the brain after exercise, especially breathing?
Oh, so with breathing, so our study actually did not test that, but what I can tell you that with breathing, we know that yes, here. Some people have shown that BDNF that you see in one of these slides, it's actually a neurotrophic factor in the brain. BDNF is a key molecule in enhancing neuroplasticity. So, some people have shown that BDNF levels increase as a consequence of doing this. That is related to meditation and yoga, not specific to breathing exercise. So, breathing exercises are still not, I mean, neuroscientifically well explored. So, we are still getting into this. But for meditation and yoga in general, people have shown BDNF stuff, and other evidences come from EEG studies and fMRI studies and MRI. So with MRI, people have shown that the gray matter increases in people who practice meditation for a very long time. Similarly, the alpha beta waves enhance in people who do meditation for a very long time. But the effects of breathing exercises at brain, cellular and physiological levels are not clear. Yeah, so that is what we want to get into. We want to understand the underlying mechanism through which breathing exercise is enhancing brain function.
Okay, ma'am. So that was the last question.
Okay.
I thank you for giving us such an enlightening session on
Thank you so
exercise.
much.
On the behalf of the Brain Awareness Week team, our organizers, as well as the students who asked very good questions.
Yeah. I'm so
So,
sorry for the initial technical stuff. I don't know what happened.
no, no,
Uh,
ma'am, it's fine, it's fine. So, thank you very much for the
Thank you so
session.
much.
Uh,
Yeah.
as for the uh, as for the listeners, next session is on Speak Your Brain Out. How does your brain understand language? With Momita Mukherjee from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. One second. So the listeners can go and check out the Brain Awareness Week website and competitions. Thank you.